You guys, welcome back to my story, part two. Before we begin, I just want to remind you guys to make sure that you're subscribed to the channel and you comment in any of my videos to be entered into the contest to win a $50 Walmart gift card and jewelry. The winner will be announced on March 1st during a live video. So now, back in part one, now if you haven't watched part one, you're going to need to watch it in order before you watch this one. And I'm going to leave a link in the description so that to the first video, to part one. Now, to give you a recap, back in part two, or part one, we left off where I had tried to commit suicide and I was in a dark place. And through all this blackness, all of a sudden I saw a dot of light. And somehow I floated to that light, and after being in darkness for so long, that little dot was so bright it hurt my eyes. The closer I got to that light, the bigger it got. And once I blinked a few times, I saw that it was the face of a beautiful lady. Her face was so full of light. As I looked closer, I noticed that she had tears in her eyes. I asked her, "Am I in heaven yet?" And her tears made me feel such regret and sorrow. And this was actually the first time that I was able to think of my kids or remember that I had a life. I told her how sorry I was. She asked me why. And all I could say was I was sorry. I could see that she was hurt by my actions. She told me I was in the hospital and that I was in a coma for 3 days. She talked to me about God and just spoke to me and told me how much He loved me and how it was not yet my time, that I have to be here to see my kids grow up. I don't remember any more conversations with the beautiful, bright nurse because I must have drifted off back to sleep. But I didn't go back to the darkness. I just slept. When I woke up, I heard commotion out in the hall, but I couldn't speak to get anyone's attention. So I tried to get out of the bed, but I couldn't feel my legs. And when I was finally able to sit up and try to stand on my legs, I couldn't feel the floor underneath my feet. So I ended up falling. And the nurses heard me, so they ran in and helped me get back into bed. And they tied my wrist to the bed so I couldn't get up anymore. They came in and talked with me. They got some information and they told me I was in the hospital and I had had my stomach pumped. I had been in a coma, and they wanted to try to figure out what happened to me because I was black and blue everywhere. I told them I didn't remember. They told me I was lucky to be alive. I think I went back to sleep again. I just remembered how tired and sore my body felt. I felt like I was hit by a baseball bat and then ran over by a truck. The next morning, I remember waking up long enough to talk with the nurse. She wanted me to think of any family members that I could call. So I kept trying to remember my mom's number, but I just couldn't think of it. And I remembered the number of a family member that lived in the same town that I did. But it took me so long to dial that number that I was so out of it and so weak. My family member lived near me, and my mom lived about an hour and a half from us. I told her where I was and what had happened and asked her if she could please get a hold of my mom. Well, she wasn't able to get a hold of my mom, so she ended up sending the police to my mom's house to inform her of what had happened. I asked the nurse to help me brush my teeth and comb my hair. So she lifted the mirror from the bedside table and bought me my stuff so that she could help me. When I looked in the mirror, I just cried. I looked at myself and I looked so bad. I didn't recognize the girl that was staring back at me. I couldn't do anything. I glanced at my arms and I had bruises everywhere. I didn't know why. I was so sad, I just went back to sleep. It was so hard to stay awake for a few days after I came out of my coma. When I woke up, I looked at the end of my bed and I saw my mom and my sister Renee sitting there. They didn't say anything, they just looked at me, and I looked at them with tears in our eyes. I smiled at them, but then all of a sudden I looked over and I saw the same beautiful nurse that was there, and I'm calling her my nurse because that's what I thought she was. I saw the same beautiful nurse that was there when I woke up out of my coma. She was just standing there. I got so excited that I told my sister and my mom that she was my nurse and that she took really good care of me when I came out of my coma. My mom and my sister kind of looked at each other and I could see the confusion in their faces. I said, "She's standing right there. I mean, can't you see her?" And when I said that, the nurse looked at me and she smiled and she walked out of the room. I cried because I knew that they couldn't see her. So I knew right away, right then and there, that she was my angel. She was not a nurse. I knew God had sent me to a part of hell in order to show me and give me just a taste of what hell is. I know there are different parts of hell, and God knew what I could and could not handle. The part I was in was bad enough. I don't want to even think of what contains the lowest depths of hell. God knows my heart, and I belong to God. He was not about to let me go. He saved me. The ER doctor who was on duty when I came into the hospital came into my room. He hugged me and was so excited when he saw me and told me what had happened in the ER. He told me that they lost me and brought me back. He told me I shouldn't be here and that grown men in my same situation has come in the ER, taken a lot less than I took and didn't even live. He told me that they had to pump my stomach, which I already knew that, and that I had died on him. He told me I was a miracle case. I said no, it was God. He agreed. I stayed in the hospital for about 2 more weeks. When I got released from the hospital, I went home. I didn't see Mike the whole time I was in the hospital. I was so happy to see my kids, so I spent time with them. It was still hard to walk. Even after I got home, my legs felt like jello. Me and Mike barely even spoke. I finally just asked him what happened? What happened to me? He sat down next to me and told me everything. He said, I was upset over the money. I came out of the bathroom after a long while, and he thought I was drunk because I was a little wobbly. When I walked into the living room, he said I fell asleep on the couch, and within a few seconds, I ended up rolling off the couch and hit my head on the coffee table. He said I hit it pretty hard. He told me I turned a greenish grayish color, and he got scared, so he called his brother. When his brother got there, he found the empty bottle in the bathroom floor. Mike said he had about 70 to 80 somas in that bottle. He said I was foaming at the mouth and turning green, and they called the ambulance. He said he asked his brother to help him get me dressed because I had on my nightgown. Well, by the time the ambulance got there, I didn't have any clothes on. I was unconscious, and despite being out of it, he said I fought them. I was laying there, foaming at the mouth, and I was dying. He said every time they thought they had me stable enough to get me out to the ambulance, something would happen, and they would have to work on me again. He said it took some time before they could even leave with me. Mike told me he had seen a lot in his life, but never saw anything like that in all his life. He thought I wasn't going to even make it to the hospital. I asked him why he didn't come to the hospital to visit me, and he said he was scared. He thought that if I died, they would blame him. I asked him if me and the kids meant enough to him to get off drugs, and he said no. And I believe God was speaking through each of us in order to get me to leave him. It felt like God led me to leave because I wouldn't have done so on my own. I know that. And I know how much those kids meant to him. So I know he would never have answered that way. So I believe that it was God that was leading us to say the things we were saying. So I know how much he loved the kids and how hard he tried to get off drugs for them. So I don't believe he answered no on his own. He was led to say no in order for God to lead me to walk out after receiving that answer. So now God took his legs and now took his family. I reminded him one last time. He took your legs. Now he took your family. Next, it's going to be your life. But he will take you at that very moment that he knows he has you. If you knew Mike and his personality, his love for God, when he smiled, his eyes would shine, and he always tried to make others around him laugh. Respect was everything to him, and if he loved you, he would lay down his life for you. And if you crossed him or disrespected him, you became his worst enemy. As much as he was a tough guy, it was as bright a light that was in him. Every now and then, God will look down into the world and see a light that's so bright that he recognizes that. And God was going to have him, and he saw that light in Mike. He was going to have him the hard way or the easy way. And God gave him every opportunity to do this thing the easy way. God saw that light and personality in Mike, so I see why he worked so hard on him in order to win him so he would go to heaven with him. God will take literally everything from you in order to have you. Even though I left Mike, I figured as long as I knew he was out there, then I would be okay. God kept me from going back. He changed my heart and my thinking. He did that supernaturally because God knew he had to do that in order to have Mike turn to him. God did allow me to keep the love I had for him. I missed him, and every day I thought about him. I would go check on him and take the kids to see him. One day, I took the kids to Mike's mom's house. He was there and visited with the kids. He just had this sad look to him, and I felt like there was just something he wasn't telling me and something he knew and didn't want me to know. He asked me at that moment if I would always tell the kids about him and don't let his little girl forget about him. And he cried a cry I had never seen him do before. So I walked over and I hugged him and I told him that he knew I will always make sure that his daughter knows her father and they wouldn't forget him. I didn't want to leave that day. I felt like I would never see him again. Something just inside of me, I felt like that would be the last time I would ever see him again. I knew I wouldn't survive his death. I felt like something was wrong. A few days after I'd left, I asked my mom to come over and babysit so I could take my son to the drive-in for his birthday. I just felt so down all day long. Actually, those few days leading up to that day, I just felt weird. It was like I was missing a piece of me. When I got home, my mom told me that the police had stopped by to inform me that Mike had passed away and to call his mom. Oh my gosh, I cried so hard. Even to this day, he took a part of my heart with him. And all of this time has passed and I was never the same. I called his mom. The first thing she told me was that he got saved before he passed away. And through my tears, I smiled. I was able to smile because I knew that God would win him and that I'll see him again at resurrection. When God calls us home, I know I'll see him. I asked her why he didn't want me there or why no one bothered to call me. And she said because he knew I would make him live and because he didn't want me to see him go. He knew I just wouldn't be able to accept it, and he's right. His loss was so unbearable. I yelled and I pleaded with God to just give him back. Just let me see him one more time. Through all my pain, God was there with me. It's said that God never gives you more than you can handle, but this was unbearable to me. By this point, I was just so tired of losing people I loved to drugs. I was tired of watching my brother go to prison because of drugs. During the time of Mike's death, my brother was doing years in prison due to a string of armed robberies. The FBI was involved, and once they captured him, he was facing a very long time. I believe he ended up getting 13 to life. Me and my sister Tisha worked at the same place, and where we worked there for years. So the owners of the restaurant where we worked, they really liked us a lot. One of the places my brother robbed was the restaurant where we worked. Me and my sister were off the night the robbery occurred, and my brother was able to pull off a string of armed robberies before he was captured. So no one in town really knew who it was that was doing all these robberies. But when we found out, my heart broke. My heart broke when he was captured, and my heart fell to the floor when I found out he was the one who also robbed my restaurant. I mean, these people loved us. How would I look them in the eye? How could I tell them how sorry I was? I just wanted to really just quit my job. I'm sure my sister felt just as horrified as I did. The owner wouldn't let us quit. He ended up calling us in and explained he didn't hold us responsible for what our brother did. He wanted us to keep working, but because the case was going to trial and the girl who was working that night had to testify against my brother, we were instructed not to discuss the case with her or allow her to discuss the case with us. I had no idea who had been working that night, so he told us who it was. My heart sank because the girl who had been working that night was 7 months pregnant. My boss knows me, and he knows I wouldn't stop until I had answers to my questions. I always usually worked with my sister, and I knew the girl who this happened to, but I never really worked with her before. And I think my boss felt bad, and I think he knew I needed to hear her story. And I'm sure that my boss knew I would never threaten her or try to talk her out of testifying against my brother. So I was shocked when I showed up to work and saw her there. All kinds of emotions ran through me, and when I saw her, I felt like if I was nice to her, then I'm betraying my brother. And for the first half of the shift, things between us were eerily quiet. She took care of her customers, and I waited on mine during the dinner rush hour. So once things got quiet and we were actually able to sit down, I started to make small talk with her. I told her I knew we weren't supposed to discuss it, but I wanted her to know how sorry I was for what my brother did to her. She said she doesn't blame me for what he did to her. And, all along, I just assumed he walked in, slipped her a note, and told her to hand over the money and left. I told her I would like to know what happened. I told her that he had a really bad drug addiction, and I wanted to believe that he was so high, maybe, and just didn't know what he was doing. She told me that it was probably better if I didn't know. And I looked her in the eyes and told her that I really needed to know. If she was able to talk about it, I would like to know. She said she was in the process of closing up that night and hadn't had a chance to lock the doors yet. And she said that he had walked in and yelled, and I don't cuss, but I'm going to say this word because this is what he said. He said, "Bitch, give me your money." She said she thought he was joking, so she started laughing. But that's when he pulled out a gun and told her he was going to kill her. He came around the counter and made her take out all the cash from the register. Then instead of leaving after he had the money, he took her to the back. She said the whole time he was making her believe that he was going to kill her, and he had the gun to her head. She said he slammed her down onto her pregnant stomach, face down, and taunted her by telling her to say goodbye. He found tape and taped up her arms behind her back and her legs. She said she really believed that she was going to die. She said his eyes looked soulless, like no one was there. No matter how much she pleaded with him, it didn't help. He made her beg for her life. That's all she would tell me. And we cried together as she told her story. And I hugged her and I told her that I was so sorry. I didn't know he was capable of that. I swore I would never speak to my brother again after that. And it took about 2 or 3 years before I could confront him in prison. I went there and I told him how he affected this girl's life, how she has nightmares, how she was pregnant. How could you do this to a pregnant woman? I mean, high or not, how could you do that? He told me that drug addicts are capable of anything, and he said he would never go back to that life, but he always says the same thing and always goes back to crime and drugs because he goes back around the same bad influences. After 13 years, my brother came up for and made parole. Everyone in the family had hopes that since he was older now, maybe he would finally be done with prison. And it's true, he never did go back to prison again. But when he got out, he did disclose to me, my mom, and my other family members that while he was in prison, it was discovered that he had contracted hepatitis C from using tattoo needles and sharing them. Jesse could have got treatment and lived a long time. He could have lived a long life, but he chose to drink and do drugs, which made this situation a lot worse. And then it ended up turning into cirrhosis of the liver. He was given 6 months to live. My brother took that time to give each of us what we needed from him. Like, for my mom, he knew my mom would never accept his death, so he tried to, every chance he got, he would just look at her and say, "Mom, you know I'm not going to be here. I'm going to die." And at this time, I lived next door to my mom, and my brother ended up moving in with her, as he knew he probably wasn't going to be living much longer. I always went over to check on my brother. And at first, I was trying to raise funds to send him to Mexico for a type of cell treatment that they have there that's not legal here, that probably should be legal here. I tried to get him clean so maybe he could even get a transplant. I was so desperate, and I wasn't getting anywhere. So I went to God. And I told him, please don't take my brother. And I begged him to help me. Because every time my brother looked at me, he had this look in his eyes that, like, he was begging me not to let him die. He knew everything I was doing, and I promised him I wouldn't let him go without a fight. My brother went from looking like this to looking like this in such a very short time. He even stopped drinking and only took medication the doctor gave him after, it took a long time to get him there, but he got there. He got to where he would walk over and he would sit on my bed and we would just talk for hours about God. He wanted to know everything. Then he wanted to know about Mike's death. He wanted to know if he died a painful death. He asked me if he would die a painful death. What would happen to him after death? And he wanted to know all about heaven. At first, I didn't feel comfortable answering his questions about death because, of course, I wanted him to live. I didn't want him to accept death. I didn't want to accept it. Or, I just didn't want him to accept death or me to help him in this death process. But unknowingly, he chose me to help him die. I went to God with all my heart in deep sorrow, and I cried out to him with everything in me. God spoke to my heart and told me that just like with Mike, he will take my brother. He told me that he would take him once he fully repents and gives his life over to Christ. He said if he allowed him to live, that he would end up going back to that same life. I took the next 2 weeks and I mourned because I knew that I had to tell my brother what God had said. But I also knew I would have to hold his hand and lead him to his death. I didn't want to help my brother to accept death. I didn't want to be the one who told my brother how he would die. I was in healthcare and I've watched so many other people die of this, and I know what they go through. He had questions and I now had to be honest with him, and I could, or as honest with him as I could, and I had to tell him that it's okay to pass on. I was so angry, not only tell him that, it's okay, but also spiritually lead him to God. I had no idea how to do this, nor did I want to do this. That's my brother. I wasn't even ready to lose him. I went back to God and said, okay, you want me to take him, you want to take him from me, then you show me how to lead him to you. you put in my mouth and speak through me, because I can't do this alone. For 2 weeks, I prayed about this. I avoided my brother every chance I could get, until one day I looked out my window and I saw my brother walking, and by this time he was on a walker and he was walking towards my house. I watched him as he walked on that walker. I knew right then and there how brave he was. And if he could face this thing, then I need to get myself together and put a brave face on and help him die at least a beautiful death if we could. As I looked out at him with tears in my eyes, all of a sudden he tripped and fell. I ran outside crying and he just smiled. I helped him up and helped him inside, and he asked me where I've been. I just looked at him and said, I'm ready. And when we looked in each other's eyes, he knew what I had meant by that. And we sat that day and talked and talked and talked, and I answered all his questions honestly. I told him that he was going to die. I cried and I told him that his death was going to be so hard on me. I felt a great amount of guilt that I couldn't save his life somehow. I told him that I was angry at Satan, at drugs. I was tired of losing everyone around me and suffering because of drugs. He asked me what I plan to do after he's gone. And I was even angry that I had to answer that question, but I did. I told him that I plan to leave the state and away from everyone so that I would never have to witness anyone I love die from drugs again. My brother had my mom take him to her church. They all prayed over him, and as they were praying over him, he got saved. He accepted God into his life and his heart. And as they were praying over him, he began to vomit. And I think he was vomiting out the evil spirits that had plagued him for years. He was vomiting out all the drugs, and God was ridding his body of that. He ended up vomiting all the way home, but he said he was so happy, like he was bragging to everybody how he had got saved. And he was just excited about that. He started reading the Bible. He started praying. And during this time, me and my brother, we got so close. We talked about God. We made even a bucket list. We even got to do a couple things on that list. He also wanted to try to apologize to as many people as he could that he hurt. My brother hurt a lot of people. And there was a lot of people that he wasn't able to apologize to, but he did ask God to forgive him. And the ones that he was able to have contact with, he did apologize to those people. And I think all of those people accepted his apology. My brother suffered so much, and it was such a journey for him spiritually. One day he got tired. This is, he even though he got his life right with God and everything, he the one thing that scared him, I think it scared him that he didn't want to die. In pain. He thought that he would feel a lot of pain and death in the dying process. So one day, my mom ran over and asked me to come real quick and check on Jesse. She said he was unresponsive. I ran over to her house, and my brother had a needle hanging out of his arm and a suicide note sitting on the table. He was pretty much telling us goodbye in that stupid note. He had something that he said to each one of us. Right away, I called 911, and I removed the needle from his arm. The paramedics were able to bring him back. What they did was they took him out on a stretcher. They got him into the ambulance, and I think they gave him a shot in the heart to bring him back. And my brother was so mad and so stubborn. He said that, they gave him a shot that burned, and he wanted to die. He demanded to know why I didn't just let him go. I yelled at him and said, "You listen here. You're not going to go on your time. You will go at that very moment that God knows that you belong to Him, and not a moment before." My brother understood, and he spent the rest of his time with his family, talking with us. He wanted to make it to Christmas, actually, but he ended up making it to New Year's. He got so bad that it wasn't possible for him to die at home like he originally wanted to do. My mom ended up calling an ambulance, and he held on that night for the rest of the night, and until the next day, till I was able to get to the hospital. So the next morning when I arrived, my mom was already there with my sister, one of my sisters, and I asked them if they could step out so I could read a letter that I had wrote to him. And, by this time, by the time I got to the hospital, my brother, he was already halfway in and out of it. He was mostly out of it because they ended up giving him something to just make him pretty much out of it. But the nurse did say that he was still able to hear everything that was going on around him. So I put my hand in his hand, and I read out loud my letter, and this is what I wrote. Jesse. Oh, Lordy, this is going to be hard. Okay. I want to start off by first saying thank you for being my brother. These past 6 months we have become so close. In you, I saw great bravery and courage as you faced death and you came to know God. I know how scared you were to die. This life was not always so kind to you, and I saw how the drugs had such a hold on you. You suffered so much. Drugs kept you from your family. Drugs kept you locked away most of your life. I want you to know that you don't have to suffer anymore. I'm so very proud of you. Not a day in this life will pass that I don't think of you. I want you to know that I'll always see your eyes looking at me with such sorrow and agony. I know you wanted to live, and I'm so sorry that you couldn't. I'm so sorry that you never really got to live life and see its beauty because of the drugs and time that you spent in prison. But what God has waiting for you is far greater than anything in this life has to offer. I've never been more proud to call you my brother. God is right there with you. Can you see him? He wants you to go home now. Don't be afraid. Just take God's hands now, and he will walk with you. It's time to rest a while, and God will call you, and in that moment, I will see you again. It's okay, Jesse. You can go now. God loves you. Go with love in your heart. Go with Jesus. Okay. At that moment, when I was finished reading that to him, I knew he heard me. He held my hand so tight that he actually almost broke it. It hurt so bad. Like, I literally had to take his hand and just pull it off of me because it hurt so bad. So I know he was listening. And I saw a tear, one tear in his eyes. I called everybody back into the room. I asked the nurse to help me make him more comfortable. We ended up changing him and changing his sheets, and as we were turning him, he ended up turning his head, and he looked at me when we turned him. I told him, I'm here and I will be here. And he closed his eyes again. And after we were done with him, getting him comfortable, 15 minutes later, he passed away. My mom screamed and just held him. I want to tell people my story that, drugs destroy lives and families without mercy. Only God can make changes in your life. Please turn to him and let him lead you in all things. I hope my story will help just one person. I feel like God needed me to rehash all of this, which it was not easy at all. And I can't believe I actually made it through 2 videos, without crying, because I had been crying for the last 2 days as God was forcing me to relive through all of this and try to remember all this, because, like I said, I wanted to keep my memories to myself. I wanted to keep them hidden, buried deep down inside. But he needed to remind me that I wasn't alone in all of that, and that no matter what struggles you go through in life, he is always there with you. always. And it's just a good feeling to know that you're not going through life alone and that you have your Father there with you. And I wanted to read this poem, and then I'm going to wrap up this video. But this poem, I found it a long time ago, and I don't know who wrote it, but I hate drugs so much. But I feel like if everyone would just really read this poem and really took it to heart, no one would ever want to try drugs or do drugs. My name is Heroin. Hello, my name is Heroin. I destroy homes, tear families apart, take your children, and that's just the start. I'm more costly than diamonds, more costly than gold. The sorrows I bring is a sight to behold. And if you need me, remember I'm easily found. I live all around you, in schools and in town. I live with the rich, I live with the poor. I live down the street and maybe next door. My power is awesome. Try me, you'll see. But if you do, you may never break free. Just try me once, and I'll own your soul. When I possess you, you'll steal, you'll lie. You do what you have to do just to get high. The crimes you'll commit for my narcotic charms will be worth the pleasure you'll feel in my arms. You'll lie to your mother. You'll steal from your father. When you see their tears, you should feel sad, but you'll forget your morals and how you were raised. I'll be your conscience, and I'll teach you my ways. I take kids from parents and parents from kids. I turn people from God and separate friends. I'll take everything from you, your looks and your pride. I'll be with you always, right by your side. You'll give up everything, your family, your home, your friends, your money. Then you'll be alone. I'll take and take until you have nothing left to give. When I'm finished with you, you'll be lucky to live. If you try me, be warned, this is no game. If you given a chance, I'll drive you insane. I'll ravish your body. I'll control your mind. I'll own you completely. Your soul will be mine. The nightmares I'll give you while lying in bed, the voices you'll hear from inside your head, the sweats, the shakes, the visions, you'll see. I want you to know these are all gifts from me. But then it's too late, and you'll know in your heart that you're mine, and we shall not part. You'll regret that you tried me. They always do. But you came to me, not I to you. You knew this would happen. Many times you were told, but you challenged my power and chose to be bold. You could have said no and just walked away. If you could live that day over, now, what would you say? I'll be your master. You'll be my slave. I'll even go with you when you go to your grave. Now that you met me, will you do Will you try me or not? It's all up to you. I can bring you more misery than words can tell. Come take my hand. Let me lead you to hell. Drugs are Satan's tool to destroy you. Don't let that happen. Thank you for watching.